Welcome to our Mochi Podcast, the only podcast rated R for Robin. I'm Robin, and today I have for my guest for episode 20, Jeff Wentworth. Jeff is one of the co-founders of Curvegrid. Jeff, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Robin. Great to be here.
Yeah, and get out of this. All right, cool. So you're in Japan. You joined Mochi Batch 3, which I think was like early 2021.
Yeah, that's correct. Wow, it's crazy. Yeah, just about a year ago.
Yeah,
That's right. Batch 3, early 2021. Time flies.
almost happy birthday, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, happy anniversary, I suppose, right? Happy
Yeah.
Mochi-versary.
How did you get involved with Mochi?
Yeah, that's such an interesting story because NFTs were just starting to take off, and
Mhm.
there was the Global NFT hackathon, I guess, about a year ago. And I was watching watching some of the guests who were being interviewed, and it was, I think, Michael I should say, from Zora.
Mhm.
And so I was watching him being interviewed, and then I found his podcast, and on his podcast he was interviewing three of the Mochi founders. And you watch a podcast on YouTube, and for
Yeah.
me anyway, just spend a few minutes of time watching it, move on. But I watched pretty much all of the 40 minutes and was fascinated. So I went to the website, signed up for kind of what I thought was the mailing list, but it ended up being like just the application form. And then,
Fell into the
I
trap.
thought, that's right. I flew into the trap. Exactly. Fly into the Venus flytrap. But you know what? I thought it was fate. And so I genuinely was like, all right, I'm interested. Like, let me, try and do a good job at this, like at the, whatever the application and kind of vetting process, and had a great chat with Gabe, and it was in and joined Batch 3, and it's been a really, really wonderful community, and been happy to be involved. And so it really did feel like a kind of fate at the time, but yeah, I had to do it, and that's my story.
So early 2021, in Japan. So from what I understand, like Japan was actually doing like pretty well in terms of like COVID precautions for like the longest
Sure.
time. And it just seems like recently it's gotten pretty bad in a lot of the places where it seemed like it was pretty under control. Like I know China, their cases have gone up. I think Korea's cases have also gone up significantly.
Mm-hmm.
What was the situation kind of like at around that time last year?
It's like it's such a blur, right? Because I think 2020, and then I think, is that 20?
Yeah, 2020,
2021, and then it's 2020.
Yeah, so far this decade's gone kind of like hazy and blurred up.
That's right. So Japan had a very challenging summer, but until that point was pretty okay. I mean, case counts up to like a spike in Tokyo would have been case counts in the hundreds for a period of weeks. So it was okay at the time. The summer was challenging. I think there was a spike up in the thousands for a few days, and there was the Olympics and everything, and then I mean, I think once Omicron started circulating around the world, everybody sort of had a sense that was going to that was going to come here too, and here we are, right? I think some things that have helped Japan, obviously being an island, it's a little bit more controlled access.
Yeah.
Just from a practical perspective, and certainly government policies, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, that have continue to control that access. Number two, there is sort of basically universal mask wearing, temperature
Mandates.
checks, hand sanitization. I mean, I would say less mandates and more just like, positive societal pressure.
Yeah, I mean, society like in Japan is much more like acclimated already to wearing masks when they're feeling sick and still going to work. And so there wasn't as much like the resistance immediately to it, like, oh, why are we suddenly wearing masks? People have always kind of been doing that in Japan.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, it's raining more now. I guess we'll just use our umbrellas every day instead of, once in a while. So yeah, I mean, that absolutely helps. I think, that did us very well for quite some time, I think.
As far as like I honestly can't say I know too much about like culture or society in like living in Japan. The most I kind of get out of it is from like anime, video games, and then I also watch a lot of like sumo wrestling on YouTube.
Got it.
Like sumo
Got
wrestling
it.
is awesome to me.
It is pretty awesome. It is pretty awesome. I've seen it live once. I think I
Hmm.
lined up at like 6 a.m. to get tickets on the day of, like get day of tickets.
Hmm.
And certainly seen it on TV. Um, yeah, I mean,
You live in Tokyo, right?
I do live in Tokyo. I do live in Tokyo. There's a ton of, I think for me, right? So I've lived in Japan for about just over 15 years, almost 16 years.
Hmm.
I think that one thing about living here is that there's always more to discover. Whether it's and in sort of any of the kind of cultural avenues, if you will, whether it's
Hmm.
food or sports or culture, arts, and yeah, that's just been a really fascinating journey to kind of unpack as I've grown in Japan,
Hmm.
right? So I moved here right out of college, right out of university, and now I'm a little bit further along in years, and there's always sort of something more to discover. So it's pretty fascinating.
So what brought you to Japan in the first place?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I didn't move to Japan, rather. Well, I guess I did move to Japan.
You eventually did at some point.
I eventually moved to Japan permanently, but the first time was just for a year.
Hmm.
About 20 years ago in 2002. And I was here. I actually lived not in Tokyo, not in a large city, but in a much smaller city, really in a town, outside of
It's called a
another city
prefecture there,
called
right?
Matsumoto. Yeah, Nagano Prefecture, where the Olympics were in 1998.
Ah, yeah.
And was working on an internship for a Japanese software company, living in a company dormitory with sort of 400 Japanese guys and a few of us like overseas interns.
Hmm.
And it was surrounded, this dormitory, by a giant printer factory and rice fields and mountains. And
Wow.
it was a really transformative experience. I came to Japan. So you mentioned you have a kind of interest in anime and manga. I didn't really know much about Japan at all. I didn't know anything about the language, but I wanted to work. I wanted an overseas internship. I wanted international experience. I wanted to see what that was
Hmm.
like, and got the opportunity and took it. And realized after a year that like I wasn't done exploring
Hmm.
and wanted to come back. And so I found a job here and came back to work in Tokyo. And you move abroad, as one does, and think maybe it'll be just a year or two, and here I
Yeah,
am
I'm
16
also in
years
that
later.
camp.
There we go. There we go. Right. So it's interesting because I think the world 20 years ago or 15 years ago was much less global than it is today. And of
Oh yeah,
course,
like every decade does not even reflect the previous decade
yeah, that's
whatsoever.
it. That's it. And that's exactly it. It's not that, well, back in my day. It's more like there's always that, like every decade is like that. And
Yeah.
it's just very,
Back in my day
it's
is
actually
literally
very
like
interesting.
it's day to day. Every single day is different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously we were talking about the pandemic a little bit, and the global nature of the world. But I know when we started, right? I mean, if there's one positive thing, if there's one of the small silver linings that's come out of it. I remember I was on a call with our extended family. I think it was for the New Year's holidays or Christmas or something like that, and everybody's fiddling. I mean, this is back in like December 2020, right?
Hmm.
So like everybody's fiddling with, or no, it was the
You,
spring, it was spring 2020.
you're originally
Uh,
from Toronto, correct?
yeah, originally from Toronto, Canada. So we're catching up with the Canadian relatives and
Hmm.
other relatives that are spread around the world, and everybody's fiddling with Zoom and mute and stuff. And there's an aunt on the phone on the Zoom that's just
Oh my
like
god, I hated
has
Zoom. I hate
like,
Zoom so
yeah,
much.
muted and stuff like that. But then it's interesting because like 1 year later, or even 6 months later, we got on a call for somebody's birthday or something like that. And like everybody's got like the lights and the microphone and the
Uh,
webcam, and like everyone, even the older generations. And I
everybody's
felt
doing their
back
own
as
separate podcast.
that's it. Yeah, yeah. Welcome to my cooking,
Our
baking
family
cookies
podcast.
podcast or something. But I was the one that left the mic on that time, and I'm getting sort of the side eye from some of my older relatives, like, "Come on, Jeff, Zoom. You should know, right?" So I think that yeah, I mean it's interesting because living here in Japan and working here. So I run a startup here.
Hmm.
Um, it's actually in some ways made us more connected globally because people are comfortable getting on Zooms now. And we may not always like it all the time because that's all we
Hmm.
do all the time now.
But now
But
everybody's used to like the technology and like the etiquette of like being on an
exactly,
online call.
exactly. Well, even Mochi, right?
Yeah,
Like, would Mochi have happened, right? Because it
yeah,
sort of was born out of a like we need this community, like a community and a group and a way for us to motivate ourselves and to better ourselves,
yeah, yeah.
through
It definitely
through
like came at like a really opportune time.
yeah, yeah.
You said you work at you started a startup. It's been Curvegrid's been around for about 5 years. Is it still technically a startup? I don't know how long the threshold is for that.
Yeah, is Google a startup or Facebook a startup, right?
Mm,
Yeah, we're still a startup. We're still small. I mean, we've got let's say 12 to 16 staff. So we're still quite a
hmm.
modest sized company. I would call us a startup. Um, yeah, this has also been interesting in the last couple of years because Mochi, of course, one of the themes that Mochi's built around is, of course, the blockchain,
Yeah.
decentralization, decentralized organizations or organizing, and that's what Curvegrid's all about as well. So that was
Hmm.
also some of the interest in Mochi is like, okay, this is a blockchain, something that's
Hmm.
rooted in the blockchain, an effort that's rooted in the blockchain. But yeah, I mean. That's also something where 5 years ago feels like, 5 decades. As things change
Oh
so
yeah.
quickly.
I mean, so
So
Ethereum launched in was it 2015, and
yes,
Bitcoin was only a 2012 thing at that point.
Bitcoin was 2009
Mm.
January, I think. And it's hard to remember, right?
Yeah,
Because
it's
it's
crazy to
like,
think that like crypto is barely like 11 years old, 12 years old. Uh,
yeah,
so I mean, yeah, just the speed at which things are accelerating and like the opportunities that have arisen out of it are quite insane. I mean, like I'm just trying to think about like a lot of like the technological things that I kind of see evolving are like video games and
hmm
like graphics cards and how people are able to like tell stories. But like
hmm
blockchain is just like entire reconceptualization of how people like interact like on like a person to person basis in like a globally financial world.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It is, and I think that um, we never sort of understand fully cause and effect, or you can never
Hmm.
predict like timing of things and how they interact is impossible. I mean, in DeFi or decentralized finance or even traditional financial markets, we might say it's impossible to time the markets, but I think it's sort of impossible to time these kinds of interactions as well. And like the there's a couple of confusing things about blockchain.
Hmm.
The first confusing thing about blockchain is that Bitcoin refers to two distinct concepts: Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, and Bitcoin, the blockchain.
Hmm.
And I think Ethereum did a marginally better job of unwinding or untwisting those things by saying, well, we have Ethereum, the blockchain, and then Ether or ETH,
Yeah.
the cryptocurrency. And you know, the point I'm trying to make here is that like underlying cryptocurrency is blockchain, and
Hmm.
blockchain, like cryptocurrency, is just one application on top of blockchain. And the timing is interesting, but it also feels sort of inevitable, right? The timing of the development of Bitcoin back in say
Yeah.
2009, right? Because
Right after the
it's
big financial
really,
collapse.
well, yes, but it's also Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever they are, put together in just kind of the right way a really interesting set of pre-existing ideas and technologies
Hmm.
that I think to me feel inevitable, but the timing of, to your point, Robin, maybe the financial crisis and computers being at the right speed or the right capability, the internet, et cetera, because in years and decades prior, we've had like the idea of smart contracts, the idea of electronic money, the idea of
Hmm.
decentralization, but it's sort of right time and right place, and that was the same thing with Ethereum. So we got into blockchain not from Bitcoin. I say we, my co-founder and I,
Hmm.
but my interest in blockchain didn't start with Bitcoin. It started with Ethereum and the concept of a DAO. where I read about that. That was a project, the original DAO, right? 2000, like the DAO as it's called, which is impossible to Google for, but the DAO. Started March, I think 2000, February, March 2016. When I read about that, it was like decentralized organization, and the original DAO was essentially what it was trying to do was put put together a decentralized venture capital fund. So we collect all this capital or all this money into a pool, and then everybody that has contributed money gets to vote on how we allocate it to fund different technology efforts or different startups. I mean, that's essentially what it was. And obviously, for those who don't know, the original DAO was hacked, right? 1/3 of its $150 million that it raised in like 2 or 3 months went to the hacker, caused the Ethereum Classic split. And we didn't really get back to DAOs until maybe last year, this year, right?
Yeah, people needed to really figure out like the security and like whether or not it was worth putting your money into this thing that like it's in code that like 99% of people don't understand like what anything that's going into it. They just kind of know like this is kind of how it's supposed to work.
Yeah. And that sort of trust by proxy is nothing new, right? Like, did you get a chance to audit your bank's like IT systems?
No, absolutely
not. Would you even want to? Like, no. Yeah. I mean, we trust by proxy all the time.
Like most people just also don't understand the internet, and like it's also like a crazy thing that I don't know if you know this, but like one of the regular things that happens with like internet like cables underseas are they get like nibbled at by sharks, and that actually causes spikes in like internet service because sharks just like to like fuck with the fiber wires that like the fiber optic cables underwater. Which is just also kind of crazy to think about.
There's a fascinating article, and I think it's probably aged fairly well. I haven't read it in years, but a long form article by a sci-fi author by the name of Neil Stephenson, who's written like Snow Crash and
I started Snow Crash. I haven't finished it
yet. Seven Eves and a bunch of other books. Diamond Age, which also Diamond Age, written in like maybe the mid '90s, also talks about cryptocurrency, But he wrote a nonfiction article for Wired magazine back in the mid '90s about undersea cables, undersea fiber optic cables. And I mean, it's sort of like we all think. I mean, I thought until that point, it all goes by a satellite. But no, I mean that's our like. Of course, it's not satellite. I shouldn't say of course. It's not satellites. It's all these undersea cables that sort of connect the world together. And I think sharks I had not heard of. I did not know that.
Yeah, but, it's a funny thing.
Yeah, the two things that are concerns that I am aware of, probably from this article, partly at least, are fishing trawlers, right? Like a fishing or an anchor getting dragged under the ocean and severing a cable, or earthquakes. And there was a very big there's a big issue in, of course, that there's the 2011 earthquake, but it was an earthquake I think a year or two before, in 2009, 2010 in near Taiwan, which severed a bunch of cables for a period of I think it was weeks, and caused a lot of havoc at the time. So, we sort of forget about the fabric of the internet until something like that happens, right?
Yeah.
So that's always a challenge, and I think that's one of the things that blockchain is there to kind of improve on, right? That it's just like the internet improved on long distance telephone lines, where like the line gets severed and like that's it. That's our one wire between, I don't know, Johannesburg and Mumbai or something like that, right? I picked two random cities, but now the internet is much more sort of like, what that brought is a lot more redundancy, and I think that's one of the things that blockchain brings, a lot more redundancy to transactional systems. Anything we want to transact, e-commerce, financial system, but even real estate contracts eventually, or identity, because I think that I think people forget that that's something that used to be a challenge. We were talking earlier about keeping in touch with family overseas, right? I don't know if you have. Well, you mentioned you live abroad, or you moved globally. So I presume you have family in a country different from where you live now. That like keeping in touch with them used to be really challenging. I mean, forget like covered wagons and like ships, like sailing boats across the sea. I mean, just making a long distance phone call was like expensive and inconvenient.
Yeah, you needed to get like
And
specific card. Like my family's
yeah,
Filipino, and like we had a lot of Philippine family in the Philippines. Well, we were growing up in the U.S., and like they would regularly have to like buy international phone cards to call without having to like blow all of the money on the phone bill for that month.
and how much would that cost? Like, how much would an international phone card cost? Do you think? Do you have
Uh,
any recollection or?
I would say probably anywhere between like 20 and $50 for like a 30-minute card, 30 minutes or like an
Yeah,
hour,
yeah, exactly. So be generous, and it's like
and that's like without video or anything. Those were
exactly.
old school phone calls.
Yeah,
No
like
FaceTiming.
yeah. So it's funny because now we think, I've got the internet, like I'll just we'll get on a podcast and we'll talk
Hmm.
for a good period of time, and it's not going to cost us. We're paying $50 or 20 or $50 a month for unlimited, like we could Zoom all day all night, and so the incremental cost is effectively zero,
Hmm.
right? And that's a huge improvement on what we had, say, even 10 or 20 years ago, 20 or even 10 years ago. um and I, again, I mean, I not that this is all about blockchain, but it sort of is. There's a lot to talk
I
about
mean,
there.
it is like the growing technology, and we are kind of like we are talking because of like a whole blockchain community relationship.
That's
The
it. That's it. And you think about the cost of like sending money overseas still today.
Mhm.
I don't know if you ever send money abroad,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
via, you know, one of the services, the Swift network or Wise or TransferWise or
yep.
whatever. I mean, again, and like that, that's something that costs, it's the same sort of thing. It takes a week or like 5 days, and it costs like 20 or $50 in fees, right?
Yep.
Like it's like sending money abroad today is like the phone cards of 10 or 20 years ago.
Hmm.
But it doesn't have to be, right? Like, we do a lot of a lot of our customers are global, and when like if you want to send money abroad today and use the blockchain, it's not like 20 or $50. It can be pennies and seconds.
Hmm.
And I
Well,
think
also
it's
technically, right
that's
now we are still kind of limited by like gas fees and stuff. Uh,
sure,
but like that's hopefully something that is going to be fixed within like the next year or two with
sure,
like the
sure.
transition to ETH2.
Sure, and of course we're talking about Ethereum, right? I mean,
Yeah,
there
yeah.
are other
Other
blockchains,
blockchains.
even, yeah, Ethereum compatible blockchains like or EVM compatible blockchains like Polygon or Binance Smart Chain or Avalanche
Yeah,
C
yeah.
Chain, et cetera, or Algorand, right? There's certainly lots of other options out there. But you bring up a point, because we're sort of in this interesting transition period
Hmm.
where it's not really mainstream yet, is it? I mean, it's you and
we're,
I can
we're
talk about it,
getting
but
everybody knows what the term NFT. A lot of people don't know what it is, but everybody kind of has at least like a passing opinion of it,
yeah,
of cryptocurrency and of like NFTs. Like they're
yeah,
kind of like they're in the discourse without people kind of knowing what they are. Kind of like
yeah.
Iraq back in like the early 2000s, and
Mm.
Afghanistan. Like everybody kind of had like an opinion of it, but like
Yeah,
nobody really knew the nuances of what we were doing, or
yeah. It reminds me. I don't know if you've ever seen that film, The Departed, like with Alec Baldwin and
no.
Leonardo DiCaprio and not Matt Damon. Yeah, Matt Damon was in it. The Departed. It was a like a Boston movie, and Boston crime syndicates and the state police, and trying to like find the bad guys and stuff. But there's one scene in that movie with Alec Baldwin, and he's sort of like a police commander or like lieutenant or something like that, detective. And he's standing in there we go, The Departed. And he's standing in a warehouse, and he's going, they're trying to find these microchips that
Oh, Martin
were
Scorsese.
stolen. Yeah, yeah, Martin Scorsese, right? They were stolen from a warehouse, and are being sold to some sort of overseas interest by these Boston gangsters. And he's like, microchips. I don't know what they are. You don't know what they are. But what it really means is money. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's sort of like what we think about like NFTs. I don't know what they are. You don't know what they are, but right now it's all about money.
Mhm.
And yeah. I mean, that's been really interesting to see because we like those of us in the know, those of us that have been into blockchain for quite some time. I mean, NFTs are nothing new. It's not a new idea.
Mhm.
I think the question in all of our minds was when, right?
Mhm.
And you look like 2 years ago, and there's a number. I mean, there's articles about this. There's a number of NFT marketplaces that just like shut down, like they just didn't make it, and they were just a little bit too early. And I mean,
Mhm.
that's so true for many industries and technologies. Like timing is so key, right? And we're
Yeah.
back to this discussion about timing again and timing things correctly. But I think that what caught us off guard was when, like they just all of a sudden, like boom, beginning of 2020, like NFTs, and that was it. How did you hear about NFTs? How did you first get into them?
Um, like I know like Gabe was like always really
Mm,
into NFTs. Both he worked on like Ujo Music, and like the
mm,
whole idea of getting like payment to artists properly.
mm-hmm,
I'd say like the first time like the NFT craze kind of like caught my eye was
mm,
with like it was either CryptoPunks. I think my first actual like involvement was like with crypto voxels, where it was like
mm,
virtual real estate.
mm-hmm.
And then there's Decentraland, I believe, also is like another
Yeah,
one of these like you buy real
yeah,
estate, you can build whatever there.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if and maybe you know this, but CryptoPunks, they launched in 2017. I mean, that's 5 years ago, four
Hmm.
years before the NFT revolution. I don't even think they sold them. I think they gave them away for the gas fee of minting, which at the time was like 11 cents or something.
Yeah. And like
And
they minted only
now,
10,000 of them, and I think it was just
yeah,
like yeah, you're right. It is 100% just like the timing of like
yeah,
when you could launch a thing and like getting these things in people's hands and like using them and then deciding to after the fact put
yeah,
a value to it. And people are just
yeah,
like, we have money and this is making us some amount of money. Like suddenly, as people know it, like those like individual cents become dollars, become tens of dollars, become hundreds of
mm-hmm,
dollars.
mm-hmm,
And suddenly you have like overnight millionaires saying like, I got this for this much. With inflation, this is how much this should be worth. And some people will buy it because they also have this
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
weird arbitrary amount of the currency that at the time had no value.
Yeah, yeah. I think the interesting thing is, uh, like like there's a question of the staying power,
Hmm.
right? Like, are we going to care? Are we going to care about it in 5 years or 10 years? I mean, NFTs. I think yes. Obviously, I'm glass half full as that, but on these projects that have come into vogue now,
Hmm.
and of course the example that everybody falls back on for that is Beanie Babies, right? This plush
Oh my
toys
god.
from the
Yeah, my
the
mom collected those.
1990s. Yeah, there you go, right?
She had a
And
closet
and
full of
and
them in like a
yeah,
like
if
a
you were,
big
yeah,
dumpster bag.
yeah, there you go, right? And everybody's like, there's people waiting for them to come back, right?
Hmm.
Like waiting for them. Um, but there's lots of other examples, like people collect coins or stamps, right? And
Uh,
and
Star Star Wars toys that
Star
were
Wars
originally created.
toys.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Comic books, baseball cards or sports cards, and but again, like not everything has that staying power is necessarily relevant.
Hmm.
It's so interesting, right? I mean, like NFTs. I mean, you think about something like a Mickey Mantle rookie card, baseball card that there's not very many of that in pristine condition would sell for millions of dollars, like $3 or $4 million.
Hmm.
And but at the time when it was printed, I mean, it cost that, it was mass produced, right? It's
Hmm.
like just mass produced cardboard and ink packaged, and for pennies, I mean, or less than pennies,
Hmm.
and like that's the analogy, right? If something has value, of course, if we believe it has value.
Yeah.
I think and we're getting back to like separating the application from the platform, right?
Hmm.
We're getting like Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, the application, from Bitcoin, the blockchain, the platform, or Ethereum, right?
Yeah.
Ether
Yeah.
and ETH, whatever. It doesn't, same deal. But like with NFTs, right? It's the thing that I think is definitely gonna have staying power is the platform. Like,
Yeah.
it's a platform for tracking, like ascribing ownership, tracking history or provenance, um, you know, reliably selling with features like escrow, attaching insurance to it. I mean, things that we don't even really have today, like that last example, but
Hmm.
are definitely possible once people decide to kind of figure that out and do that. Um, that we don't have with existing
Hmm.
collectibles, right? And people think, I mean, the other example I always hear about, I'm sure, we could talk about this for days, of course, is music. And you mentioned the Ujo example, and I'm sure Gabe has lots of thoughts on that. I'm sure you do as well. What strikes me is that um like, for a long time, music has all been just digital.
Hmm.
From the time that a famous artist goes into the studio, it's all just ones and zeros and bits and bytes on an asset like a computer disk.
Hmm.
And what comes out of the end of my streaming service versus what the artist recorded, if it's a high enough quality streaming service, it's exactly the same,
And
right?
there's
And
like,
it's not.
the vinyl people, but like those are also different people.
But yeah, that's true. But think about this, right? Think about this. The vinyl people, right? If they're listening to a recent artist,
Hmm.
it probably got put onto vinyl coming out of the ones
Off,
and zeros.
yeah, off of the CD.
Off of, well, yeah, or off of the digital
Yeah,
audio
yeah.
tape or digital audio like file on the hard drive, right? The Pro Tools session or whatever,
Hmm.
right? And but the point being is, just because I have the ones and zeros, or I've right click saved as the JPEG file or whatever it is, of course it doesn't mean that I own it.
Yeah.
And that's where I think is very confusing, because NFTs are ultimately about that ownership and that provenance and that history and the transaction and the economics of it,
Hmm.
and
As opposed to like the JPEG or the GIF or whatever.
exactly, that's almost like incidental.
Yeah, there was a
um,
guy who like he essentially like backed up all of I don't know if it was like it was all of OpenSea. He like downloaded all of the videos and GIFs and pictures off
yeah.
of OpenSea and made it like it's a NFT pirate bay essentially. And like while none of that like technically has any value, he essentially did just like back up their entire library
Hmm.
just in case something happens. But like the
There you
point
go.
was to like demonstrate the frivolity of it, but at the same time, like it really doesn't actually capture any of the thing that the NFT is
Hmm.
supposed to preserve.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I read an article years ago about somebody who was like borrowing CDs from a library or renting them, and when you could rent CDs,
Hmm.
and like basically copying them all onto other CDs and like just storing them in their house.
Yep.
And obviously, probably, well, actually, I don't know, right? Because there are, I think, in some jurisdictions, laws that allow you to basically do that for your own personal listening,
Hmm.
depending on the circuit. Like, think about like mixtapes and things like that, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But
I think the issue is always
what?
becomes about distribution
Yeah,
and
yeah.
commercial
Well, it's
use.
interesting because like a singular case like that, like the giant torrent of torrent file of zip file of JPEGs or NFTs,
Yeah, yeah.
or this person who was doing the same with music CDs. Like, at some point in the future, it crosses the line from being, wow, if they ever like, if ever really gets out, or people figure out who it is, like they're opening themselves to prosecution, to,
Hmm.
wow, thankfully this person like archived this. It's like a Rosetta Stone, or like,
Yeah,
library of not Library of Babel, Library of Alexandria.
yeah, yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, thank goodness, right? Dead Sea Scrolls, whatever you want.
That
That
somebody
that
was able to actually like preserve these things.
Yeah.
Uh,
But that's interesting. That's an interesting idea, because the concept of these blockchains we have today is that they'll last forever. Like, you'll be able to go back to transaction zero or block zero,
mhm.
and look at what happened then all the way to the future. But at what point do they stop existing? You know,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's an interesting one for me,
I guess
because
when you burn the hash on the thing, and like
could be.
when when
Yeah,
when you
I
when
mean,
you claim that ticket for the Nike shoe, the limited edition NFT
sure,
Nike shoe or whatever.
sure. but that record, the fact that at one point you owned it on this block and then you burned it on this other block will always be there.
Yeah, it's still on record. So
Right. And so, will that always continue to grow, or will we get to a point where people are upset with this clutter that we have in these transaction systems and decide, no, actually we're going to change the technology such that we can discard history that's old enough? I mean, I think that's an interesting question for me.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I mean, definitely not in the near future, just because it is still very much like a pretty like new thing. But I mean, that's the whole thing that gives like financial systems credit. Like they have a long history of, keeping people's money safe, of like recording transactions and like doing what is right by the people that like entrusted them with funds, or
Sure.
they entrusted funds too. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think like the historicity of it definitely has like a forward pushing thing that will keep it relevant for a long time.
Yeah. Agreed. I think it's going to be interesting when people figure out better ways to connect physical items to the digital as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I know
When you're
there's
able
a
to like
lot of
scan
interest in
things
that.
into the
Yeah.
mail.
Yeah, exactly. Or, we kind of already have that in some ways. Like you look at art, or, a valuable piece of art. I don't know, the Mona Lisa. It probably has binders and binders and books, full of um, research to prove its authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming, I don't know, I'm not an art historian, but I'm assuming in a relatively free form kind of way, that like this is a document from like 300 years ago, and it's in this folder, and it proves like, and people I'm sure have written PhD theses on these things, like
Mm-hmm.
just on the provenance and history of it. Um, you know, but like that's kind of a special case. There's obviously a lot of effort and time that goes into that. What if I want to instead, you know, I, I, I don't know, prove that let's say not prove, but let's say commemorate this you know wedding gift that was given, and prove that it came from me, and that somebody in the future, like it's an heirloom type of item,
Mm-hmm.
it's a salad bowl or something like that, it has kind of this meaning, and that this specialness to it. I mean, today, right, you would have some sort of certificate that it was created by this artist, and it was given as a gift on this date and had this value and things like that, and then somebody in
Mm-hmm.
the future go, wow, like that artist has become really famous. This bowl that was like $100 at the time is now like $20,000 because they only made 10 of them and then went on to do all this other stuff. Um, how do you prove like the provenance of that? And sometimes it's about money. Sometimes it's just about like wanting to know, I think, where things came from. Um,
I think it's
but
going to look
like,
kind of mundane in the future, as opposed to like looking at all the documents. You're just looking at like blocks on the chain. It's like,
yeah,
oh, I guess this is all the proof I need. There's no
yeah,
like, there's no deep account of how this crossed the
yeah,
Atlantic in
yeah.
a
But
oak barrel.
well, that's it, right? But I think it's going to be interesting, and a lot of it's going to come down to how much people care,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, do we care to know? Do we care to keep history forever, and like, to what level do we want to track something like, yeah, I don't know, barrels of like, I don't know, raw materials traveling across the ocean? Like, maybe we care about it and its provenance for that period of time, and then after that we can kind of discard
Mm-hmm.
the history, right? For example, or different levels of it. Like, we need to know that this amount was shipped on this date and it's got this serial number in case there's some problem with it, and we can track back. There's some, I don't know, like, um, environmental issue or something like that. I mean, that's of course very, very important. Um, but I think in both of those cases, but especially the case where it's consumers and individuals, it has to be very seamless, and that's
Mm-hmm.
something we do very poorly right now in the
Yeah.
blockchain space, is making that experience easy to use. Like, QR codes, or like RFIDs, and scanning stuff with the phone, kind of only gets you so far until it like either is easily breakable,
Mm-hmm.
like the QR code rubs off, or somebody copies the sticker or something like that, or like clunky to use and not very upgradable. Like, what's the longevity of RFID? Is it going to be working? Is an RFID chip in this heirloom salad bowl going to be working in 5 or 10 or 20
That's
years?
true.
You know, versus like documents from the 1700s, like it's paper and being well preserved, like we can hang on to it.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that kind of longevity and ease of use is something we don't quite have figured out yet.
Hmm. So you're in the blockchain space. Your background was in computer. Was it computer engineering or was it programming?
Yeah, computer engineering, so a mixture of hardware and software, and creating electronic devices, but also developing software to do useful things, I suppose.
Yeah. So you are one of the co-founders of Curvegrid. Curvegrid. So you're a middleware blockchain service. Can you tell me a little
That's
bit
right.
about that? Like
Yeah,
what
yeah,
you guys do?
absolutely. So we actually, as I mentioned, we sort of got interested in blockchain, my co-founder and I, in 2016, but started Curvegrid a little more than a year later, I guess, in 2017. And our company is based in Tokyo, Japan. We're both originally from Canada. I moved out here, as I mentioned, 15 years ago. He moved back here because we did that internship together. So we've known
Hmm.
each other for 20 years. He moved back here maybe about 10 years ago, and decided to start Curvegrid because we saw the opportunity in blockchain, right, stemming from the idea of the DAO, and like, okay, this is going to change the world. So we came up with a bunch of, like, a whole list of ideas, and in May 2017, we ended up jumping on a plane to New York City to attend the Consensus Conference, SUS, Consensus
Hmm.
SUS.
Always got to make that
And
distinction.
I
That
got to
word is
make
now
that
tainted.
distinction. It is, and well, I have to make it especially because, and Consensus Conference sponsored by CoinDesk, of course, right?
Hmm.
The I have to make the distinction because uh, within the conference there was a Consensus
YS.
SYS
Yeah.
hackathon the weekend before, and we booked the plane tickets coming from Japan before they'd announced the hackathon, and we thought, hackathon, like, we both have computer engineering, computer science backgrounds, like, this sounds fun. This
Hmm.
would be a great way to get into it. So we were 2 weeks into Curvegrid, I think, when that conference happened, something like that, and arrive in New York. Um, the hackathon was on the weekend before the conference, but we arrived on like the Saturday night after it had started on Saturday morning. So we showed up sort of the next morning, jet lagged, but on the right end of the day. So, we'd been up at like 5 a.m. and like, we're ready to go. And everybody's sort of been hacking all night and all day and stuff like that. And we went down our list of ideas. I think we had somebody sort of join us on the team, to kind of like with the, to help out, a non programmer, but to kind of ideate and things like that. And we came up with this. We picked one of the ideas at the top of our list, which was a decentralized warehouse management system. So putting items on, tracking warehouse items on the blockchain. And we didn't know anything about blockchain, so we spent a couple hours hacking that day. We ended up having to go meet some friends for brunch, and that we had scheduled weeks and weeks beforehand, and came back and presented,
Oh,
and
there you are.
somehow one. There I am there. Yeah, there's our team. The picture's a little, we don't get together that much anymore. So we haven't had a chance to really update our team photos in like the last 2 years because of the pandemic, of course. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah,
Slick
we
jackets.
somehow won an award at this hackathon, and it was from Consensus. It was like the Consensus Prize, which was entrance to Consensus Academy, and it was sort of
Hmm.
the conciliatory prize. Like, they're there, you've done very well, but you could use some more help. So that was great. That was our
You didn't win, but
foray
we
into
want you to
blockchain.
stick around and keep trying.
Yeah, exactly. And we got to meet some great people through the Consensus Academy, and sort of started building our idea, which was for this middleware, because we were building all these things like the decentralized warehouse management system, and realized that people, everybody, it was so hard at the time. There were no tools available to develop on blockchain, develop dApps on blockchain. And so the middleware idea was that there has to be a platform like a
Hmm.
WordPress or like an AWS or a GitHub or Azure or for blockchain. And that's kind of what Multibass, our product, is.
Hmm.
So that's the extended origin story
So
of Curvegrid.
yeah, what has your like learning process been like? So
Mm.
you went from like a traditional like computer engineering. I don't imagine they covered like smart contracting, like construction and stuff. So how kind of has your like education developed? in the blockchain space over like I guess the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, we're a little unusual because we're two technical co-founders. Like usually you have, 0 or 1 technical co-founders. We have two, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, just a broad generalization there for many startups. And so, we really oriented ourselves on just building things from the start and trying things out. And it's literally been that like every day for 5 years,
So like a lot
just
of trial
learning,
and
learning,
error.
learning. Yeah, and it's funny because you can, if you want to learn to program, right? You can go to school. That's a great option. You can read
Hmm.
books. You can read documentation online. You can read Stack Overflow, which is a website for technologists and programmers to with questions and answers. But in the blockchain space, it's all so new and all moving so fast that there aren't, people always ask me like, well, what book should I read? And then there's a few high level ones, right? Understanding Ethereum, I think is
Hmm.
one, or mastering Ethereum, mastering the original, mastering Bitcoin. But things are moving so quickly that the documentation's out of date. Like there aren't any up to date books. The documentation's out of date. Stack Overflow questions are often out of date, and so you're reading like the source code of the programmers that are building the
Yeah, you're just going to
blockchains
GitHub and like
as they're
looking at all the
writing it.
different repositories and
Yeah,
yeah.
and sometimes we're contributing to those projects as well, and I think that's how we sort of knew and have continued to know that we're on the bleeding edge and on the cutting edge of something, because this stuff is just being developed in like real time.
Hmm.
And so it's been a continuous learning process, which is interesting because none of us in Curvegrid knew a lot about blockchain before we started. I mean, some people came in with some interest in knowledge for sure,
Hmm.
but I think that's been part of kind of our ethos is, well, we can teach you, right? Or we can all teach each other.
Yeah, we're all
Um,
learning at the same time. Like,
yeah, exactly. How do you learn about it? That's I'm curious actually. How do you sort of learn
I
about
mean,
blockchain?
mostly through Gabe. And I've done a
Sure.
little bit of like reading through it myself. I've a lot of the people that I've had on for podcasts are like,
Mm,
you know, founders of different things. Tenderly,
yeah.
Mark Balin is like one of the is the founder of Myco. Jared Pereira, he does Hyperlink Academy. And so just kind of getting other people's perspectives on it, seeing kind of what's happening in like the news space.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
like
I
I don't work on the technical side. It's still more of the I'm learning with everybody else.
Sure.
I'm learning with the rest of the plebes.
You have, and I think for all of us, like, the first time you send your sort of real money cryptocurrency transaction or blockchain transaction, it's like,
Hmm.
wow, okay, it doesn't really even matter the amount. Like, wow, that was like 10 cents or $10 or $1,000 or whatever it is. It's like, okay, I get it now. It's like cash on the table. Like, I'm doing something real here, real
Hmm.
in the metaverse or real in the ether or
Which is
whatever it
funny because
is.
at the same time you're not putting in like cash. You're not putting in
Mm,
like bills into like a thing and it's absorbing it.
yeah,
You're moving numbers from another thing that you have already faith in into a thing that you're not sure of. But it's still
yeah.
just like this again ethereal retention of value.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I remember I took an Econ 101 class, an economics 101 class in university, and that's where I first really like learned or understood that, oh, like the entire modern financial system since we got rid of the gold standard is just built on faith.
Hmm.
And I think what you just said there a second ago, Robin, about you're moving numbers from one thing that we have faith in, traditional banking system, to
Hmm.
something that is like new and kind of like we're still figuring out, right? And maybe we have less faith in, maybe not for
Hmm.
us, but maybe for certainly for people that are just coming into it. I mean, that's kind of a really like strange concept, isn't it? It's like, wait a minute,
I
I'm moving
mean,
numbers around now.
it's a commonality I think between blockchain
Mm,
and then like economics and finance. It's all built around like this concept of trust,
yeah,
identity, and like being able to build that trust based on the history of your previous interactions with other people.
for sure,
Uh,
for sure. And it's sort of it's like codifying it, or it's like it's even though it's so ethereal, It's
Hmm.
kind of making it real, right?
Yeah,
Like we
trying to
have our
make
trust.
tangible this thing that is like the concept of trust
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. I
between
mean,
like millions and billions of people who don't know each
exactly.
other.
I haven't seen this done effectively yet, but one of the applications that I'm excited to see somebody build or really bring to life is this kind of concept of like community vouching for people.
Hmm.
And it, the practical application of it is you've lost access to your private key. Your phone was stolen or you dropped it in a river or something like
Hmm.
that. And tied to your private key is like maybe it's not even money, it's like your digital identity, like, oh geez, my high school certificate and
Hmm.
my birth certificate, my passport were like all tied
To this
to this private
identity.
key,
Uh-huh.
which I had on my phone, I had backed up, but I dropped my whole bag in there, and for it's like the one time a year, I mean, but the idea that you could have your community come together of real people
Uh-huh.
that know you and vouch for you and essentially like restore your private key and assign it to you. And of course, there's all like, it brings up all
Mm.
sorts of like challenges, like how do we do this, et cetera, et cetera. But like today, that, I mean, we do that today, but in a centralized sense, right? You go to, oh, I lost my birth certificate, or
Yeah,
my house burned down and
you've
my
got like the
passport's gone.
government
And
who's supposed to be keeping
yeah,
track of all that
exactly.
stuff.
Exactly. And they have a process for it. And of course, it's not perfect. And I would say that it's going to be a balance between, it's always going to be a balance between like allowing, like reducing the friction for people that are doing like the right thing to allow them to live their lives in
Hmm.
society, versus like cutting out, let's say, the people that are trying to abuse the system, right? And
Hmm.
like, I don't know, get a passport in somebody's name who's already died or something like that to do nefarious things. But there's another aspect to that, which is that you've got, and this is this concept in blockchain that I'm sure you've heard about, and I don't hear about it, I don't hear the phrase so much anymore, but it's bank the unbanked, like give the unbanked
Credit. So
access to, yeah. And I
mhm.
think it's the billion people or whatever it is in the world that don't have access to a financial system. Part of that, of course, is like, well, I think a big part of it is like they don't have access to get ID, or it's hard, or they need somebody else to vouch for them. They have to
Yeah,
bribe somebody off, or the services aren't available in their area, or there's many, many, many reasons. And I think that blockchain on smartphones, and you can get a smartphone at retail in certain parts of the world for like $8.
hmm.
Like
Oh wow.
literally, yeah. Actually, if you go on here, this is an interesting thing. If you go on to Amazon.com, and we're going to look up like cheap smartphone, and we're going to see how cheap we can get a smartphone. And I say smartphone, it's important because uh like a smartphone is sort of like the we talk about hardware wallets and things like that, but really to interact with something, you need something a little, you need a piece of technology that's portable and handheld and has internet access eventually, and can run like the cryptographic operations that are important for blockchain.
30
There we
bucks.
go. $30. And I mean, cheap smartphone. This is retail on Amazon. Like click into that. Click into that first one.
The
So
sponsored
okay,
one.
that's locked. Yeah, it's
That's a lot of
sponsored.
fun.
It's locked to some character. See, try like unlocked cheap smartphone or something like that. Just to add unlock to it. Okay, that is not particularly inexpensive. 192. I guarantee you we can get sub $100. Um, for sure. Maybe you can sort by price, descending or something. So go to
Yeah.
like up to $50 or $100, or up to $50. Yeah.
Nope, that's the sponsored one. SIM card
There we
included.
go.
It's still locked.
There we go. Oh,
Um, 50
this
to
is
100.
delivered to a particular country. I think if you, yeah, there we go.
If
These are
I
all locked. Yeah, pick like, United States or whatever. I don't know, Japan, Canada. Yeah,
let's go Canada.
there we go.
$7.
Unlocked. There we go. Unlocked. Dual SIM smartphone, dual SIM. It's probably got 2 cameras, 8 gigs, $70, $69, right? And this is retail on Amazon, shipped to your door. But you've got to consider if, like the retail cost of that, $8 is certainly realistic, right?
Hmm.
And that's a number that I surprised me until somebody told me that's what you could buy a smartphone for in some parts of the world. But imagine you got a smartphone, you maybe don't even have reliable reception.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter because, right, you have a group of people with their private keys on their phones, and to regenerate, or let's say to regenerate their family member or friend's private key, they've lost their cell phone in a river or something, got eaten by some a livestock or whatever.
Shark trying to find new
Uh,
ways to get into the internet.
yeah, that's right. But yeah, exactly. Or they're even doing a transaction. They don't have to be online anymore. Like, that's the other interesting thing about blockchain. You don't necessarily have to be connected to the internet right away,
Hmm.
right? And I mean, that's that kind of true meaning of peer to peer. It's like people concerned about double spend, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you spend the same money twice, and that happens in credit cards, right? It's a real problem in electronic money where you swipe your credit card, and it like it doesn't make it all the way to the bank
Mm-hmm.
before the transaction's approved, and you run to the next store and essentially swipe it again, and only at the reconciliation time at the end of the day, or like 2 days later, it's like, oh, they're out of credit,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's why sometimes sometimes you can go over your credit limit a little bit, right? And it's the same thing with blockchain. It's like, if I'm buying like a $3 coffee, well, it doesn't matter if I'm completely up to date, as long as I'm close enough, right? I mean, seconds or
Mm-hmm.
even maybe minutes off, that transaction can be approved immediately. And if you have internet connectivity, of course, it's immediate. I mean, we're talking hundreds of milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
And the risk then is that, I am a couple minutes out and they run to the cafe next door and spend $3, and that cafe like doesn't get their money, or maybe I don't get my money. If it's an expensive transaction like a house or a car or something, yeah, let me wait like 10 minutes or maybe even an hour.
Mm-hmm.
But 10 minutes should be more than enough, right? Um, but yeah, like blockchain is as fast, is faster, is more secure, is more usable and useful, but we're not quite there yet with the last mile and
Mm-hmm.
all of these challenges. That's something we really have to work on, I think.
Well, like the good thing is like it's now more in people's faces, and like more people are
Mm,
like figuring out like this is as everybody is starting to like get to the consensus US that this is kind of
the
like the
third meaning,
future.
there's a third meaning, the actual, like, not capital C,
Yeah. Uh,
lowercase c. Yeah,
where we're arriving at like the idea that people need to start building on this. These are things that we can fix, and it's not just like it's not just like a spike in a stock price. It's like an evolution in how we're able to like interact with each other and systems. More people are starting to like learn and study and build out like not just like applications, but also the literature for to get more people into the thing.
sure, absolutely, absolutely. um I think about it with I've two young kids today, and how fluent they are with technology without
Hmm.
even thinking about it, and they don't, we don't give them a lot of screen time, as it were. Like, they don't have a lot of exposure to it, but it's so natural to them,
Hmm.
right? Because of what they see and their friends, and it's just like it's in the world around them, and it's going to
It's
be
part of the
interesting,
schooling
and
too.
it's part of the story. It's part of the story.
No, no, I said
um
the schooling like
Part of the schooling. Part of
like
the
you're
schooling,
you're expected to
exactly.
be able to do research, like look up on
Yeah,
things online. Like kids are getting into programming classes,
for
are
sure,
like interacting
for
with little
sure,
Arduinos and
for sure. Like, what's the but and then I think there's going to be an analog for that to blockchain in
Mhm.
some number of years. When we're not going to have to explain it to people anymore. Just like, yeah, people don't understand the internet. Coming back to our earlier discussion, like, no, there are most people don't truly understand what it is, but everybody knows it,
Yeah,
right? It's just, you know,
it'll
it's just
become
there.
already like a commonality that nobody needs to like how's the water today? It's like what water are you talking about?
Exactly. Exactly. Right. It's whether it's actually a utility like the water or not is besides the point. It'll just it'll just be there.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I'm still wondering. Like, I definitely feel like companies and governments are kind of dragging their feet in, but like making internet like a utility, a
Mm,
necessary utility for like
mm,
functioning in the world.
hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. I mean, I think uh, it's so interesting. I mean, I think that there's this like organic process that happens, right? And it's like I wondered for years, like, how can you live in a concrete apartment, but water, your neighbor upstairs has a leak and water gets into your apartment. But I realized that concrete is porous, and there's
Hmm.
small cracks that form, and like, yeah, the water will flow through it. And I sort of feel it's that way with like the internet, and it's a very powerful thing. And I think it's going to be the same. It is the same thing with blockchain, that it just permeates until it's kind of there. And there's sort of an interesting story that I think about, or interesting kind of aspect of this as it relates to Wi-Fi, right? So
Hmm.
why, like, you've probably heard like 2.4 gigahertz before, right? 2.4G, right?
Yeah,
Wi-Fi
yeah.
maybe, or 5G, right? So but do you know why it's 2.4 gigahertz?
I
Like, is
have no
that like
clue.
an up?
No.
So the reason is that falls into unlicensed radio spectrum, right? So
Hmm.
radio waves, right? Um,
Operate on
Obviously can travel.
frequencies.
Yeah, they could travel long distances. I mean, light is also electromagnetic waves,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's blocked by walls. The challenge with radio is it travels long distances, and what eventually was realized around the world was that if we don't license this in our geographical area, right, and globally to some degree, then people, like, it'll be the Wild West, and radio won't be able to function. Radios won't be able to function because the frequencies just uh, um, like talk over one another,
Hmm.
right? And so that's how we talk about like spectrum auctions, and the FCC in the United States, for example, right? Or whatever authority in whatever country we happen to be in, essentially assigns frequencies to industries, and then even down to individual licensees like companies, right?
Hmm.
And um, like, one of the reasons to switch from our old analog TVs, not to flat screen TVs, but to like digital TV,
Hmm.
was that analog TV required so much frequency that it was kind of crowding out other use cases that needed it and wanted it.
Ah, I see.
And yeah, and like, there's lots of things. So don't worry, the story's going somewhere. There's lots of things in this world. There's
Gone.
lots of things in this world that require that emit electromagnetic energy,
Hmm.
right? Microwaves, garage door openers. Well, that is a radio frequency. Your microwave operates, just emits radio frequencies, and they all, what they found was, and I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg, but guess which frequency microwave ovens operate on?
2.4 gigahertz.
Exactly. And so it's a really, really noisy spectrum. It's like a garbage chunk of spectrum that nobody wants. It's called unlicensed spectrum. So you don't actually need a license. Like, you don't need to go and,
Hmm.
reserve a chunk of spectrum to operate on 2.4 gigahertz. You still have to get your piece of electronic equipment that you design as an engineer, approved, so that it's like safe and it's not emitting too much energy, and et cetera,
Hmm.
et cetera. But you don't need a license. So cordless telephones, microwave ovens, garage door openers, remote control toy cars, and Wi-Fi.
Huh.
And Wi-Fi, like, one of the reasons they picked that spectrum is that basically you didn't need to go through all the challenge to get licensed, and everybody's in the same spectrum, right?
Hmm.
Like, I don't need to negotiate some license, and we don't need to share how we're all going to use this particular spectrum.
So everybody's
We just
already using the
we
same.
use the garbage spectrum, yeah. So we can focus on the standards, and we can, a million manufacturers, or not a million, but whatever, thousands of manufacturers can all create their own Wi-Fi devices that will talk to one another on this spectrum.
Hmm.
Now all of a sudden, like, we don't have to have like long cables, trailing everywhere throughout our house. This
Hmm.
is power cable,
Yeah.
but trailing everywhere throughout our house to connect our computers together. We can have Wi-Fi in airports and schools and hospitals, and the shopping malls and our homes, and
Hmm.
it's just extended the reach of the internet. This is like the concept of this water seeping through the porous cracks, like, to fill those spaces. I sort of feel like blockchain is kind of the same thing. Like, it's unlicensed, right? It's regulated for in some jurisdictions, in many jurisdictions, for
Yeah, yeah.
financial uses, as it should be. But essentially, like, it's like infrastructure.
It's
It's
like
like infrastructure,
immutable.
like the yeah, exactly, right. Um I think it's sort of like, the analog is Wi-Fi. So it's interesting. The other interesting thing about Wi-Fi is we have such better radio technology today than say 30 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
because the Wi-Fi engineers had to solve how to have reliable signals on this extremely noisy spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at, like, I don't know, satellite TV or something like that, they have their own spectrum, and nothing else, nobody else is supposed to be on it. And so,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, but if there's like a solar storm or something like that, your satellite TV goes out. Wi-Fi these days, like, microwave oven goes on, no problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of the same way with blockchain. Like, I think some of the trial by fire that blockchains, like, well, all blockchains, all major public blockchains go through in terms of scaling and forks and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
it honestly makes them a lot stronger than, I think, traditional transaction networks, right? Like, they can survive internet outages, they can survive bugs in the software, problems. They have a way
Server
to
crashes or
reconcile
whatever.
themselves. Yeah, exactly. Versus traditional banking software, let's say, for example, which in some cases is purpose built and operating on a clean spectrum, and everything's got to
Mm-hmm.
be exact, and it works very well in those conditions. But
As
those
soon as
conditions
something
are very
goes wrong,
expensive to maintain.
yeah.
What's that?
As soon as something goes wrong, then like you could be missing data, like stuff could get corrupted, but like
Exactly.
you can't do the same thing to.
Exactly. So I think the point that I'm trying to make here is not that traditional banks and banking systems won't go away.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just see them shift more and more to the blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
Is what I think will ultimately happen. Like, the back end systems, the underlying systems, will get replaced with blockchain technology over
And
time.
ultimately eliminate a lot of those like other inefficiencies in like reporting and data
Yeah.
keeping and.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
I actually really got to thank you because I'm constantly wondering about what the fuck Wi-Fi is and how.
Yeah.
Because I have
Yeah.
no background whatsoever in like technology. I studied
Sure.
economics and English.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure. But yeah, I mean, it's something we don't. It's another one of those examples of things that we use every day and just don't think
yeah,
about,
I could not explain
right?
Wi-Fi or internet to anybody like now,
Yeah.
much less like 100 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like one of those things sort of born out of like not just necessity, but became stronger because of the kind of difficult conditions that it was incubated in.
Hmm.
So, and I think blockchain is the same way, and in two ways. I mean, not just the technology, but also sort of the financial gauntlet it's had to run. And it's um, I wonder, actually, I don't know about this. Maybe you know about this. Like, when money first was invented, or
Hmm.
credit cards were first invented. I don't mean credit cards in like the 1970s, but I'm talking like the
Extending lines of
concept of
credit.
giving. Yeah, I'm the concept of giving credit to people, which is like, that idea must be thousands of years old. Like, were those the sorts of things that the first person to be like, wait a minute, like, instead of exchanging chickens at the market, like, why don't I want your chicken, I'll just give you this piece of,
Well,
like, paper.
I can't give dates to it, but like
Mm,
I know that like the original concept it served like the purpose of trade. How am I going to be like when everything was like on gold and silver and stuff, and
sure.
because like different countries had different like rates of exchange and different values and stuff, banks were the ones
Mm,
who were like maintaining that value. They would take in collateral and they would give these vouchers of credit to and like you could extend that, and so you could redeem this voucher at another bank for like the same amount of chickens or
mm,
cows or whatever. And it's
mm,
all about like
sure.
it ultimately becomes a thing of like liquidity. It's how much gold you guys have in repositories so that you can exchange that
Hmm.
for the chickens.
Sure. Sure.
and
Sure.
and
Sure.
then
Sure.
like the credit thing that eventually did become more of a necessity to how are you going to establish people's credit histories and their identities and stuff.
Yeah.
And like
And
that was like banks, that's why they served like an essential function in growing markets and international
got it.
trade.
Got it. And I wonder, when that was happening, like, was it a, like, what was their trial by fire? What was their difficult circumstance
I think a lot of it
circumstance they had to overcome?
I think a lot of it was getting the right people to vouch for you. That's why like
Mm,
nobility and stuff was significant. Heritage
yeah, sure.
was definitely one of those things because
Sure.
land deeds and title deeds were entitled to families, to people, and like you
Mm,
needed some sort of history. That's why it was really important to maintain like your dignity in society and stuff, and
Yeah.
why like it was really disadvantageous to marry down
Mm.
financially. Dowry
Hmm.
was super important for this same reason, because you're taking on a family name, you're taking on a line of credit that was established over generations.
Yeah. It comes back to trust, doesn't it? It
Yep.
comes back to trust. Yeah. And provenance, right?
Hmm.
History, generations of family.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How would you say like the blockchain space is like? How would you say that is in like Japan?
Mm.
Because in terms of like, I know that Japan more or less has they've really got like only one party of government. Their international like trade and like financial structure has been dictated by the same party for like I don't know how many years at this point, and it's not likely to change. So like how would you say that their attitude has
Mm.
been towards blockchain technology and blockchain finance
Mm.
and stuff?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, and I'll ask you another question in a second to help sort of help me kind of think about how I might give some thoughts on that. But yeah, I think Japan in general, and it's just sort of a fact of where it's come from and where it is. I mean, it is quite homogenous, right?
Hmm.
And but that's kind of the surface layer, right? Like it's homogeneous on the surface, but I think underneath there is a lot of um, rebellion in different ways,
Hmm.
and push for change in different ways, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, um, that sort of manifests itself in different kinds of activity, and sometimes it's surprising activity. I mean, one example I think of is um, uh, and it's not really related, but I'll tie it back to something in a minute. After the March 11th earthquake and tsunami, horrible event, right?
Was that the one that
Uh,
triggered like the meltdown at like Fukushima?
yes,
I
yes,
Okay.
exactly that one. And I mean, tens of thousands of people lost their lives or were missing, and
Hmm.
hundreds of thousands displaced, not just by the tsunami and earthquake, but also by the nuclear meltdown. And one of the things that happened was because all of Japan's nuclear reactors got shut down,
Hmm.
uh, like over the weeks and months after that. I
Hmm.
think Japan had something at the time like 45 operating nuclear reactors, and was some substantial portion of Japan's electrical generating capacity.
Hmm.
And Japan, of course, is an island, and so everything is
Yeah.
self-contained. And it's even more complicated because have you heard of the concept of like 50 hertz or 60 hertz, like electrical frequencies? You
Uh,
plug in, you
yeah.
well, you go to different countries and it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
the plugs look different, but also the electrical
DC,
voltage is different.
AC.
Yeah, AC, but sometimes it's 200 volts and sometimes it's 100 or 120.
Mhm.
And you plug for your computer, it's fine because the power brick thingy is smart enough. But you plug in your blender in the wrong country, like you bought it in one country and you plug it in another country,
Mhm.
and it like the motor fries or whatever, right?
But yeah, suffice it to
So
say, I don't know what the 50, 60 hertz thing is.
yeah. So it's 1560 hertz has to do with a characteristic of how the electricity is basically switching back and forth.
Hmm.
And some countries are 50 hertz and some countries are 60 hertz. Japan is split down the middle
Like
because
55.
actually I don't really know why, but the electrical basically, I guess when electrical infrastructure was put into place in Japan, say
Hmm.
100 plus years ago, they started independently in two parts of the country and kind of met in the middle. And
Oh, that's
basically, the
funny.
power grids are disconnected.
Uh-huh.
So in the east and northeast of Japan, when the earthquake and tsunami happened, and the electrical nuclear power plant shut down, the west of Japan could not share power with the east,
Oh.
and that exacerbated the problem. So that one of the decisions that got made was we're going to replace all, and again this is 2011. We're going to replace all incandescent light bulbs with LED light bulbs, and it was
Hmm.
basically overnight. And I don't know how much of a law versus mandate it was, but essentially the entire country just got on board and was like, yeah, we're going to do it.
Hmm.
And it almost like
And was that like
um,
to a specific like one of those, the 60 or the 50 hertz? So to like get everybody uniform onto like the same.
nope. Power grids are still disconnected. That's a
Oh.
bigger
So
infrastructure problem.
what does the light bulb thing have to do with it?
The light bulb thing has to do with saving energy,
Oh, okay.
because like a traditional incandescent light bulb is
Yeah, yeah.
about 60 watts or maybe 100 watts. and an LED equivalent LED light bulb is like 3.5 watts. Right. And so, you know, I mean, you don't have to know what a watt is to know that, like, let's say 3 versus 60, it's like requires 20 times more energy times, you know, the number of households, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, it was I don't know the actual, like, I don't have numbers on the impact, but it certainly wasn't an impact. And I will tie this back to something related to blockchain in a second in Japan, but, you know, how much, so this is the question I wanted to ask you. Have you heard of Mount Gox before?
Gox. No. How do you spell that? I can look it up.
MT, like mountain, MT space GOX.
Okay. The mountain I wasn't confused about.
Yeah. You know, it's so funny, guys. I was talking to my friend about this years ago, but like, we can't hold a conversation anymore. There was some point years past where we passed the point you can't hold a conversation anymore without an internet connected device. You know, we used to like, I bet you this or bet you that. And it's like, when I get home, I'm going to go look it up in my encyclopedia and I'm going to give you a phone call or send you a fax. And these days, like, we just settled the debate right away. But yeah, Mount Gox was one of the first cryptocurrency exchanges. And it stands for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. Have you heard of Magic the Gathering? Do you know what
really?
That is?
Yeah, the card game.
The card game. So it started out as a website to trade Magic the Gathering cards, like these trading card games, and then somehow turned into a Bitcoin exchange. It was just Bitcoin at the time. And basically maybe Litecoin, I don't know. But anyway, it suffered a major hack, I think in 2013, 2014. And at the time it was doing something like 70% of all Bitcoin volume globally. And I mean, just imagine that, right?
So 25,000 Bitcoin robbed from 478 accounts.
Yeah. Like what is that? Like 25,000 Bitcoin. What is that worth today? That's like,
if like one Bitcoin right now is 50,000.
Yeah, so it's like, is that like $10 billion? Am I math right? I think I'm not off by a zero, right? Like $10 billion leak or something like that.
1,250 million.
1,250 million. All right, I was off by a zero, but it's a large amount of money, right? It's not a small amount of money. And at the time, but also you have to think about how many Bitcoin have been mined since then. At the time, Mt. Gox was doing something like, as I said, like 70% of all Bitcoin trading volume globally, because there was a lot fewer Bitcoin. Not only was it worth less, but there was a lot fewer Bitcoin. And it basically like tanked the exchange and shone a very bright light on this extremely nascent or new industry globally, but in Japan. This is one of these cases where you might think that, you know, it doesn't fit. It's not homogenous. It's not the traditional banking sector, and Japan would just shut it down. But there were other crypto exchanges operating in Japan at the time. They, together with the regulators and the government and people in the banking industry, decided, no, you know what? We're not going to shut it down. We're actually just going to regulate it because we see some future in it. And I mean, you know, like,
that's a lot of foresight.
It is. It's not what you would expect, right? We're
especially like really early on. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it was like 2015, I think 2014 or 2013, 14, the hack happened. 2015, the policy was written. In 2016 or 17, the law, I think 2016, the law passed and came into effect maybe in 2017, which basically regulated cryptocurrency in Japan. And I am not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but essentially regulated cryptocurrency in Japan as a currency and not an asset. And put in place a framework to regulate cryptocurrency exchanges, like centralized cryptocurrency exchanges. And so, you know, and of course this was ahead of the ICO boom. I mean, you think 2014, 2015, nobody knew what Bitcoin was.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Ethereum wasn't even like months old, or wasn't even, you know.
I think I remember like Bitcoin at the time was at most like 100. It was like somewhere between like 60 and like $150 per Bitcoin.
Right. Exactly. Right. And, but, you know, so Japan, I mean, people say, oh, Japan, like it's super regulated and super strict and everything, but that's why, like I think Japan was just so early with it, like so early. I mean, you know,
which it does lend credence to Satoshi being Japanese in some way. Or...
Well, you know, I mean, you never know. You never know.
The great mystery. This will actually be a fascinating thing to kind of like dissect, like for historians in the future. who the hell
Yeah.
Satoshi was.
Yeah. I'm of the belief we'll figure it out one day. Somebody knows. There has to be somebody who knows, like, definitively.
There was that one guy who was like claiming for the longest time that he is,
Yeah.
but like nobody
Yeah.
believed him.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't think he was ever able to prove it either to anybody's satisfaction. But so what happened here was yeah, basically, like, you had all of these crypto exchanges sprout up and then get regulated and be regulated. And there's been some challenges since. There's been some notable hacks since then. But what it has essentially meant is that everybody, right? The government, regulators, large industry, banking institutions, consumers, like, everybody is behind cryptocurrency in Japan and blockchain. It's not a sort of like taboo subject. I think even in like the United States, I don't think take an exchange like Coinbase. I don't think they're regulated in all states yet, right? Like, I think I had
Yeah, I don't know
a
about
friend.
that.
I had a friend in Hawaii who, like, can't open a Coinbase account because it's not regulated. Like, it's it's because it's state by state, right? It's a little bit different. And then yeah, it's for a software business like ours, right, where we sell software and we're not a cryptocurrency company, we're a software company, but we are in the blockchain industry, and many of our customers are involved in that and understand it, it's easy for us, let's say, to receive payment for invoices in cryptocurrency, report it via our accountants to the tax authorities, and nobody bats an eye at the tax authorities or a bank or anybody, because it's just, yeah, we have corporate crypto exchange accounts, and it's easy. I mean, it's really, really easy. You can send a wire transfer to a crypto exchange account in Japan, and it's in there in a few minutes.
Do like regular businesses accept cryptocurrency for payments? Or like, can you go to a coffee shop and like pay in Ether or Bitcoin?
It's interesting because not really. Like, some places, yes, but a couple of things happen. So the first is that like, it's sort of like the unstoppable force ran into the immovable object or something like that. I mean, that's not quite the analogy, but like, reality caught up with things at some point, and it's a regulated industry, and so if you want to do payments in the coffee shop, you've got to put in place that infrastructure. And I think it was less that cryptocurrency was being blocked. I think it's just that, like,
The barrier
electronic
to entry is a
payments
little
were
bit
not
too
a thing.
high.
What's that?
The barrier to entry is a little bit too high for like the small business to like allow that to work.
Yeah, and I'd say beyond that, like, there are businesses that, like, there was an airline, Peach Airlines, that was accepting Bitcoin for flight tickets, and Bit Camera, I think, still you can go and buy electronics. There's an electronics store, you still buy electronics and Bitcoin and things like that. But, like, now that it was regulated, now we need all this retail infrastructure, consumer infrastructure, that it can't sort of be like, hey, I whipped up a payment app on my smartphone, and it's I've installed it on a bunch of cafe smartphones or tablets that they have, and now they can accept Bitcoin. Like, no longer could you do that, right? So it certainly slowed down the pace of some things, but at the same time accelerated the pace of others. So yeah, you have these cryptocurrency exchanges in Japan, which were like, marketing themselves much as the sort of day trading market, or the Forex, foreign exchange market, market itself. So you may not know this, or you may know this, I don't know, but Japan, I think, is the biggest foreign exchange market in the world. It's got something like 40% of the foreign exchange trading, and it's not like, hey, I'm going to the airport and I'm taking out exchanging my yen for euros or something like that. It's like trading currencies as an asset class, and there's various reasons for that, why it became a thing in Japan, but it's a thing here. Something like, and my numbers might be off at this point, but something like 40% of the global volume is Japan, and 80% of that is retail. And that mapped onto, so this is like people on the train on their smartphone on an app trading, like, euros for US dollars. as like a thing. Like this is a thing in Japan, right? And so that mapped onto cryptocurrency. So I think rather than it getting shuttled into like payments, which were sort of like there was going to be a long road of like we don't have electronic payments infrastructure anyway. The popularity here is just trading cryptocurrencies, basically, much as people trade foreign exchange, like retail investors, retail traders. Kind of interesting, right? Like I don't know.
As opposed to like, just conventional like trading of like stocks or bonds or the
Yeah, exactly. You can do that too,
assets.
but that's less popular than trading currencies in Japan.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And but then what happened here is now we have a ton of electronic payment infrastructure, but it sort of like skipped over blockchain and just went straight to like centralized databases. And I think that has to do with just how it happened. Again, it was sort of the LED example, much as the LED light example where things changed overnight and there was kind of a central mandate to do it and everybody kind of got on board. And it's similar with cryptocurrency where people made cryptocurrency is a little bit different. People made the unexpected decision, but with electronic payments, like Japan was actually a very cash heavy society at retail until the last few years. And I think that, the government and industry, like everybody sort of felt it was time. And now, there's almost like too many choices. Like you go into a convenience store and you've got like 30 different electronic payment options. And, you sort of like pick the one that you want to use. So, yeah.
Yeah. Imagine I imagine like the Japanese government then has like their own stable coin, their own, like.
Well, they're talking about it, right? Like they're definitely talking about it. It's, the I think, and I'm just going by news articles, right? But you look at back to I think 2019, where the message that I remember coming from the government was that there was a lot of opposition to it, and that was right around the time that Diem or Libra, it was Libra at the time, and Diem, the Facebook Meta stablecoin project, basket of stablecoin project got announced. Japanese government, I think, was one of the ones that said we're not so interested in that in central bank digital currencies or CBDCs at the moment. But then a few months later, China announced that, hey, by the way, we're all in on CBDCs, and we've been working on this project, the CBDC project, kind of quietly for the last couple of years. I think that changed things a lot globally, and so now including in Japan, and I think people realize, wait a minute, this could be like a thing, and we should probably like invest time and energy into this. So yeah, I mean, Japan is certainly working on it, right? I think Japan is certainly working on CBDCs, as are basically all other economies. It's a question of who gets there first and what does that mean, and how centralized versus decentralized. I think the proxy for that is actually not cryptocurrencies themselves, but stable coins, right? It's like the proxy CBDC. It's except instead of being, it's not really CBDC. It's more just CDC, or just DC, digital currency, I guess. I don't know.
But
there's no central bank involved.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that I think that will definitely become a thing in Japan. It's just a matter of time, and same with everywhere else.
Yeah, especially because I mean, with cryptocurrency specifically, there's also like that degree of like memehood to it, and like Japan loves they love their cartoon characters and their mascots. So
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think that like everywhere does things a little bit differently, and I think Japan will do it. We'll do it we'll do it in its own way, and it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. But I think that kind of like different ways of doing things, diversity, if you will,
it makes things better. Like
makes it better, right?
Different perspectives and approaches to similar problems and obstacles.
Yeah, these sorts of things sometimes, deciding on something like we're all going to do 50 hertz or 60 hertz, or we're all going to do, like for electricity, we're all going to drive on one side of the road to the other side of the road. It can work pretty well. And of course, like we don't always end up on the same answer. But then other examples like Wi-Fi, where we sort of like, we're just throwing this idea into this kind of messy pot, or with blockchain, where it's like, let's let this thing sort of develop organically on the internet. I think that, that like lack of less central planning can really help as well. And it's going to be, I don't know. I don't think it's clear whether for stable coins and central bank digital currencies, what the right answer is there. Like, the amount of regulation versus not regulation, the amount of guidelines versus not having guidelines will be kind of the right answer for that. Or we'll see. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I mean, especially because like, each country has their own like approach to, digital crimes, and like that's one of the big concerns I think with a lot of people still, like how much like untracked money to like ambiguous identities are able to be caught, because like most like crimes related to like cryptocurrency are not, or like stolen cryptocurrency, it can't be recovered.
Well, it's interesting though, because if you go back to that Mt. Gox Wikipedia article, I mean, you don't actually have to open it again, but they have managed to recover a lot of that years later. And I think,
really,
I mean, yeah, the like cryptocurrency is a good place was a good place to maybe get away with things as long as people weren't looking at it. But it's a really bad place to get away with things because you have an immutable public ledger with all the information there. And we're seeing that this week. You probably saw the $3.6 billion Bitcoin launderers or heist that maybe you haven't seen the news yet.
I did not.
Like they caught them, and it's been like 10 years or something like that. I think the Bitcoin was stolen like 10 or 11 years ago. And
wow.
And they found them because like the transaction record is there forever, and the digital forensic tools are getting better and better. And that's what
I was going to say. I thought the forensic tools are like almost non-existent at this point for that, for like tracking where and like, because everything is encrypted. So
well, it's yeah, I mean it's encrypted, but it's also public, right? Like the encryption happens when you're communicating to prevent people from spying on your direct communication with another party. Like you go to a website and you don't want your neighbor connecting to your Wi-Fi and seeing what your
watching you punch in
see what
codes
website
and
you're going to.
yeah,
Whatever it is, right? But once it's on the blockchain, it is public. Now it's semi-anonymous, right? So you get your, let's say, your Ethereum address, and it's a big long number,
string,
right? Essentially. And if you just have an Ethereum address and somebody sends you Ethereum to it, well, and you don't ever do anything with it, it's still fairly anonymous, except you're connected to that person that somehow sent it to you, right? Like that you can draw a connection there. But if you start to draw enough connections, you can start to de-anonymize things, and that's what the current tools are very good at doing and getting better and better. And especially when every time it touches something that's off blockchain,
yeah,
you go to buy your coffee at a cafe or something.
Yeah.
It's like now we have a touch point, right? Or you even keeping it on the blockchain, but you trade it to somebody else who's traded somebody else. Eventually, you'll get to the end where it's being traded to somebody that has a name and an address, and they may know nothing about this, but they're like, well, I bought this thing on this website with this, and here you go. And they just start connecting the dots. And when they have enough of these dots connected, it's kind of different from, like, let's say, cash in a suitcase, or even traditional electronic banking, right? Which has, of course, still has huge issues with money laundering, where, if you can interrupt the flow, right? You send it to a bank in some country, and that bank sends it on to another bank in another country, and then the middle bank wipes its records. There's an unscrupulous employee at the bank that wipes out the records. Well, you don't know where it went. The money's still valid money.
Yeah,
right.
I think this is one of the things that like is very much like a like one of the big strengths with like blockchain, like being able to like trace what happened with what money. I just thought at this point that it was like very difficult or like impossible to get to that. But it's good to know that the counter is true, that because it's so traceable, everybody, like you can find, as long as you're willing to like go down the rabbit hole and actually pick through all the grains of hay.
Absolutely. Robin, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Dude, thanks for coming on. So Curvegrid, your website is, again, curvegrid.com. Anything else you've been working on? Anything you kind of want to
I don't have a
pitch?
SoundCloud, so we'll just keep it to curvegrid.com. And yeah, I mean, yeah, if you are building a blockchain application, or you think you might want to in the future, yeah, please do get in touch with us. We'd love to chat with you.
Yeah, and also I'll try to connect you to see what's going on with like the donut progress within Mochi. All right, Jeff, thank you for coming on. This has been Jeff Wentworth. I'm Robin. This has been our Mochi Podcast, episode 20. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.